Testing. Testing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I can hear you without that too.
No, the test.
Yeah, but I can hear the microphone.
The tree. Technically,
There's
there is
really
nothing
no
wrong.
religious significance to the tree in any case, I don't think.
If you talk to the priests, they want to get rid of the tree as much as we want to get rid of the tree.
Yeah.
I remember in Argentina, my neighbors, they were saying that the main sermon during Christmas was all about how bad it is to have a tree. No, because it's not a Catholic symbol. It's pagan. So they don't want the tree. What they want is the
pagan symbol.
yeah, they want is the nativity, the scene. That's the only one. The only thing they want.
It makes it a holiday instead of a holy day.
A lot of the symbols do come from pagan rituals, but they've
Yeah,
Christianized them.
absolutely.
And from nature.
Is there anybody online?
Oh, I didn't check. Where should I check this? Comments, maybe? No, it was supposed to have only 2 people online. I, yeah, I can tell, but I need to change.
I told you, I saw my son do a Haftarah here when I was in Prague. I saw my son do a Haftarah here when I was in Prague.
Well, the things that unite us is the star.
Here, I found it. Yeah, you see, we have 4 people online.
I look for the unifying.
Oh, shit. Okay, so let's pass the material. I'm sorry. Sorry. Yes, we are on camera. We are always on camera. And one for Ruth. One for the doctor. Another one. One for me.
Are these just number 6, right?
So happy Hanukkah, everyone. Sorry, but I have a little typo there. I'm judging others, class number 6, but it's actually number 7. Anyway. Should be 7. I didn't want to print it all over again just for that thing, right? We didn't want to kill that many trees. So I will pass the mic here. Maybe you can take it.
Are we going to YouTube tonight?
Yes, always. We have 4 people. So I brought back today one Mishnah that we studied the very, very first class that we had. I don't know how many of you remember, but we talked about Avot 1:1. The difference is, and that's why I brought it back then, we put all the focus on the first part. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. So remember, we were talking about the chain of tradition. Moses receiving the Torah on Sinai and passing it to Joshua and blah, blah, blah. We never, on that first class, talked about the last line, which basically says, be deliberate in judgment, raise up many disciples, and make a fence for And that is going to be, believe it or not, the only material for tonight's class. Because I think it's a very interesting statement that the rabbis made there. The first thing we have to understand when we read that line is who said it. So let's read the first Mishnah. I will read it this time. Moshe, that is Moses, received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted to Joshua, Yehoshua, and Yehoshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophet transmitted it to the men of the great assembly. That is very important for tonight. Men of the great assembly. They said three things: be deliberate in judgment, rise up many disciples, and make a fence for the Torah. Okay? Now, the first thing you're going to notice, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, is that, of course, they said more than three things. If you read this Mishnah, it looks like that's the only three things that they've ever said in their lives. Right? They said three things. No, they said more than three things. But why is the Mishnah saying that? We're going to see. Second is who were these men of the great assembly? Because remember, previous classes, we talked about the Zugot. Who were the Zugot? Zugot? Any takers?
Eddie.
The president, the Nasi, and the Av Beit Din of the...
The Zugot were the couples. There were a couple of rabbis that they were the ones who, they were the authorities of the generations. One was the president of the Beit Din, and the other one was the president of the Sanhedrin, the other one of the head of the Beit Din. Okay? Two most prestigious positions at the time. So between two people, if they had any problem, they would just come to a decision between the two of them. That's all they needed. And it's not that there was one more important than the other. The two were at the same level. It's pretty much the same model that we adopted here at the Shari Zedek, where there is no senior rabbi, there are two rabbis. We basically did things that the board think that we did something new. Actually, we did something that is 2,000 years old. We went back to the model of the Zugot.
And how did they get that position? Are they elected?
By appointment. Yeah, by appointment. It was not hereditary. It wasn't like royalty. It wasn't like the priesthood. No. It's a good question. I don't know. Probably by the Sanhedrin.
Were they holy as well as learned?
Yes, absolutely. So we usually talk in class the Zugot. We talk about the Tanaim, the one who wrote the Mishnah. We talk about the Amoraim, the one who wrote the Talmud. We talk about the Geonim, the one after the Talmud was closed and finished, and so forth. But we never really talked about the men of the Great Assembly. By the way, in Hebrew, men of the Great Assembly are known as Anshei Knesset HaGedolah. Anshei means the men. Knesset HaGedolah. Okay? So let's read a little bit about this. Mel, if you want to read for us. And you see, I put a photo for you there. Let's see if you can guess what's going on with that photo. Then I will tell you the answer after we read text number 2.
You want me to read that from the men of the Great Assembly? Or you just want us
Yeah,
to
the
look
men
at-
of the Great Assembly, yeah, that's what it
Men
says.
of the Great Assembly were a group of 120 elders, including the last surviving prophets of the greatest Torah scholars of the generation. Among them were Ezra,
Zerubbabel.
Mordecai,
Remember Mordecai, this is the one from, where do we know Mordecai from? Purim. This is the Mordecai
That-
from the story of Purim, that after the story of Purim ends, he convinced the king, the one who married Esther, to allow the Jews to go back to Israel and to rebuild the temple. So basically he came, according to the rabbis, he came with Ezra and Nehemiah back to Israel, and he was one of the elders that was part of this Anshei Knesset HaGedolah. Very interesting theory. Factual? Who knows? But that's what the rabbis believe. Who else was there?
Nehemiah, Haggai,
A guy?
Zechariah, and Malachi. They thrived at the time of Ezra.
You have to
when
talk to the microphone.
They thrived at the time of Ezra when the Jews returned to Eretz Israel from Babylonia at the beginning of the second era.
Okay, let's keep reading. The text continues on page 2.
Among the developments in Judaism that are attributed to them are the mixing of the Jewish Bible canon, including the book of Ezekiel, Daniel, Esther, and the 12 minor prophets, the introduction of the Feast of Purim, and the institution of the prayer known as the Amidah, as well as other synagogal prayers, rituals, and benedictions.
Okay, so before you continue, this actually makes sense to think that, for example, the Amidah is something that is very old. How do we know that? Because even between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, the Amidah is virtually identical. Or the Kaddish, for example, they're virtually identical, and many other things. So you compare the two Siddurim, all the things that they are pretty much the same, we believe that they're coming from those days. Sometimes they started to be developed after the destruction of the first temple, and for sure they were put together by the time of the second temple. Why? Because when the second temple was built, this is something that people sometimes don't realize, many Jews already didn't like the idea of the sacrifices anymore. They got used to pray to God in a different way. And the second temple wasn't as the first one. Yeah, it was probably fancier, but there were many missing things. For example, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there anymore. It's almost like, yeah, aesthetically it looks like the temple, but there were many missing key components, key elements. Like the original tablets of the law that God gave to Moses, they were put inside the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, what else was inside the Ark of the Covenant? There was one more thing that was to put it there and keep it for the future so people will remember.
The broken tablets of the first.
Yeah, the broken tablets. What else?
And I think, wasn't it I don't know, the stick that, the flowers that Aaron, when they were, I forget the exact word, but.
Oh, the almonds. I can't remember about this one. But what I'm talking about is the manna. They have to save a sample of the manna and to keep it, and to keep it inside the tablet of inside the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, they have to keep it there for the future. So people will remember and believe the manna. But that was stolen with the destruction of the first temple and never came back. That was key. That was almost what was attracting God to the building. Nevertheless, for the time of the second temple, it wasn't the same thing. Jewish thought already evolved, and they believe in different ways of connecting with God. They didn't really believe that they needed this sacrifices business to connect with God anymore. So more and more people were relying on prayers. And remember, also many Jews decided not to come back. They stayed in Babylonia. They were having a nice life there. So they never experienced the second temple.
Remind me what year the first temple. I thought between the first and second temple there only were like 100 years or something.
No, it was like
so
first one was 300 and something. I can't remember the.
No, 560, right, was when the
Hold on.
second temple was.
I can tell you right now because I'm terrible with dates.
And all the time they were in Babylon, right?
Yeah.
Destruction of the first temple, 587 BCE.
Right, and the second temple was built in 530 or so. When was the second temple built?
Second temple was the common era, the destruction.
No, built.
Oh, build, yeah. For the destruction and the rebuild, there wasn't that much time. Yeah, you're right
Right.
about that.
So so the only real difference is that they're in Babylonia for a generation, really. Between.
Yeah, but this not okay. I understand what you're saying. They were there was a generation that they were not allowed to go back.
Yeah.
But even when they were allowed to go back, many people decided not to go back.
Right.
And
No, I
that's why when
understand
you have the Talmud, the most important was the Talmud of Babylonia.
Yes.
Because the big scholars, they stayed there. And it was actually it's quite a statement because the temple was in Jerusalem. And if you truly believe that you needed the sacrifices to communicate with God, why would you stay in Babylonia? When all you had were the prayers.
But those were also the scholars that left after the destruction of the second temple.
Well, after the destruction of the second temple, yeah. But the thing is, many went there because the academies were already there.
Yeah.
So it was a no-brainer to go there because they already have the communities.
Even after the destruction of the second temple, didn't many people stay in the land? Wasn't there still a Sanhedrin at Yavne or something?
They tried to do it, and I think the last spark of hope to rebuild some kind of Jewish life in Israel was finished with, who was the guy? Gedalia. Wasn't him the one, the last one? It was, no, hold on. You see, I have the facts mixed up again. But it was,
Gedalia was after destruction of the first temple.
yeah, no, that's who was the government. Hold on a minute. It's
He was assassinated after the first temple was
it's
destroyed.
which one it is? Darn, you see, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it's there is a fast that we falls at the same time. There was the last hope that they tried to rebuild some kind of Jewish life after the destruction of the second temple, and it failed. Then after that, there was pretty much no influence. There was always people who stayed in Israel. Yes.
Wasn't there a Nasi? I think the Romans called him a patriarch until about 400 of the Common Era. I mean, there was some sort of Yehuda Nasi died in about 215, didn't he? When did he die?
I don't know.
But I thought I read someplace that there was some Nasi, that was recognized by the Romans until.
I don't remember that part of history. I'll have to read my facts on that.
I could be wrong about that.
No, but yet I know that there were attempts to rebuild the Jewish life after the destruction of the second temple, but it failed. And it was pretty much irrelevant in Jewish history because the big academies were in Babylonia. They already existed from before. It was very interesting. The diaspora scholars were more important than the Israeli scholars.
Well, there's a reason. There's always a reason.
Yeah, well,
What do the scholars,
yeah, I should have passed that to Eddie before. Just talk to that.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do the scholars today say about that period, and why did it happen, in their opinions?
Happened what?
Like you were saying, the scholars of the diaspora from Babylon.
Oh, why?
Yeah.
Why they were no? Because remember, after the destruction of the first temple, scholars they were forcibly exiled to Babylonia by Nebuchadnezzar. Once they moved there, they were free to create their own academies and to teach Torah. They flourished. It's like happened with European Jews moved to the United States. They found all this freedom that they never had before, and so they flourished there. They had the schools, lots of people studying, lots of scholars training new scholars, and many people that that's all they knew. And they didn't want to go back to Israel in the same reason why people from the United States of Canada, we are so comfortable here, we don't want to go to Israel.
I think if I remember right, what happened in Israel is after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, everyone was finished. There were people. That's when all the remainder of the mass migration happened, because there was huge deaths then, and until that point, I think they were allowed to practice, but I think after that there really was very little there.
Yeah, so that's what I said. It was irrelevant in Jewish history. But there was, that's what I was trying to remember, the name of the leader who tried to...
Isn't that the one that went under in a coffin?
No, but that was Yohanan ben Zakkai.
Yeah, so that he
went to the city of Yavne,
right,
and created a yeshiva there. I'm trying to remember who tried to recreate, like Eddie said, the Sanhedrin and everything in the land of Israel.
And
Sanhedrin didn't have capital criminal powers, but if you just look at the Sanhedrin after the destruction of the temple, didn't have powers of capital punishment like the original did, but I think they could decide on questions of halacha. I think I could be wrong, but in Yavna, I think you're saying, and there's another place. There's a place called Usha as well. I'm not sure. But, it's been a while since I read about this.
Yeah,
but.
me too.
By the way, was Yehuda Hanasi, did he live in Babylonia or in Israel?
Yehuda Anasi. That's a good question, because it's a Tanakh.
Yeah, he redacted he's credited for redacting the Mishnah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. It's a good question.
Maybe he moved back and forth. Didn't some of them move back and forth?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but this is the Mishnah. This is before the Babylonian Talmud. I have to go read the biographies. I don't remember the biographies of every single guy.
who do they think had removed the Ark of the Covenant from the original temple?
Babylonians. They stole it. It was part of the looting, yeah. You will see, if you ask in this day the Ethiopians,
Yes.
they believe that they have it. Yeah, they believe that they have it. Okay, let's keep reading. So where we finish? Oh, we need a microphone, Eddie.
Before I read on, I'm going to comment on this next line. Why were they called men of the great assembly? And it seems to me we're referring to, this is aside from what I just read, that they were called men of the great assembly, and why they were the judges. What it seems to me, it is because they are the builders of the temple. The temple gets built by men, so we're always referring to the builders as the men that had the most to say, or it could be the other way around. The ones who had the most to say were the ones who built the temple. Anyway, I'll go on. Explained that greatness lay in their ability to perceive God's greatness, even in times of exile and the apparent eclipse of his glory, whereas others felt with justification that God could not be praised fully in the era when his people were subjugated and his temple had been desecrated. These men saw and proclaimed his greatness even then, and in this lay their greatness. After the Babylonian exile, the men of the Great Assembly realized that with the end of the prophetic era, there was a vacuum in Torah leadership, and they stepped into the breach. They assumed that the helm and and instituted many enactments to ensure compliance with the Torah. The last surviving member of the Great Assembly was Shimon
Tzaddik.
Tzaddik,
And that's the
the
tomb.
learned.
That's the tomb that you saw in the first page. Shimon HaTzadik,
Where's that?
East Jerusalem.
You know, often the tomb looks like an altar, and in fact, there's bodies under.
Yeah, but actually, this is a place that is in East Jerusalem, but historians actually doubt that that's the real thing.
My question is, in the tomb, are they reverenced? Like for sacrifice, would you have sacrifice over a tomb?
No. Sacrifice?
Yeah.
No. In Judaism,
Like
never.
they would use it as an altar.
No, because in Judaism you were not allowed to sacrifice anywhere except in the Temple of Jerusalem. That's it. It was a big sin to sacrifice somewhere else. So we never did that.
Well, we did. We did a lot.
Well, in the northern kingdom, that was Jeroboam who tried to create a new religion, but that was not Judaism. But that was not Judaism. He tried to create a new religion. Yeah, the king Jeroboam, he was jealous of the south at the time of the separation of the two kingdoms. So what happened is the Temple of Jerusalem was part of the southern kingdom, and King Jeroboam was the king of the north. And he said, if they have a temple, we have to have a temple. But they said, whoa, hold on a minute. The Torah said we are not allowed to have a temple. So he created a new religion. And yeah, some theory says that was the beginning of the oral law. But that's for a different time. Okay, so David, you had...
These few men, leaders,
Yes.
kept what I would call the core, the purity of the Torah, no matter what.
Yes. Yeah. And it's actually because the Torah doesn't say anywhere. No, David, you want to read?
No.
Okay, so you have to read. So the Torah doesn't say anywhere that they have to create this council of rabbis, right? They created it because they saw what's going on around them. There were no more prophets. That was one of the byproducts of the destruction of the temple. Prophecy was finished. So there was nobody to remind people what they're supposed to be doing. Because remember, the prophets, sometimes people have the misconception that the prophets were sent by God to teach them new things. The prophets were sent by God to remind them what they're supposed to be doing. Prophets never taught anything new. Never. Ever. Prophets were reminders by God. There was a time where,
That's the first time I've heard that.
yeah, we never learned anything from the prophets. Nothing new. Sometimes we learn the details, how they practice certain things, and we learn from there how to do certain things. But no, there wasn't something new. Now, when prophecy was finished, because God decided not to send any more prophets, who will take over that responsibility? So there were a group of scholars, also known as rabbis, who took that responsibility. They got together and they tried to do their best to preserve Judaism.
But this is still a time of the Sadducees. I mean, they
Sadducees.
Sadducees.
The Sadducees were the Italian Sadducees.
No, the Sadducees. CC is cheese, Sadducees.
The Sadducees.
And it was a Roman colony then. So, I mean, they preserved. They were practicing Torah Judaism.
They actually, I don't think so, because, well, the problem is all the facts we have are coming from the rabbis. So they are the one who wrote the history. Right? And you know what happened? If the winners write history, that means that should be another account that we never hear about. So the rabbis say that the Sadducees actually they didn't care about Torah at all. That they were not religious people in an alternative way. They were actually people who didn't care for anything.
But they followed the Torah laws, though, I
They
thought.
said that the rabbis said that not even that.
I see.
Not even that. That not even that they followed, because we have the understanding that the Pharisees or the rabbis, they incorporated oral law, while the Sadducees, they rejected oral law and they were following the Torah according to the written text only.
Right.
Well, it's not necessarily true, because the way they were living their lives, it's like they didn't even care about the written law. That's why sometimes we talk about the Karaites and they try to connect the Karaites with the Sadducees. I think we are not doing any favor to the Karaites, because the Karaites are truly religious people, while the Sadducees couldn't care less about anything. And that was one of the big problems with the rabbis as well, that they feared this as this group of priests, they believe that they think they are the true Judaism, but they don't care about anything. All they cared was about this obsolete system of connection with God through sacrifices, which is the truth. It didn't work out anymore. Even before the destruction of the temple, the system was broken. Do you think they started to write prayers and to have synagogues after the destruction of the first temple? I would say that they started before. Because for many people, the system didn't work anymore. Because people weren't stupid. They saw what's going on around. Don't you think that people knew that the priests were corrupt? People know it. So for many people, religious people, they already realized that the system was broken, didn't work anymore. Sacrificing wasn't what it was when the Jews left Egypt. But they couldn't understand any alternative to sacrificing. Little by little, society was evolving. They did understand that there was a different way to develop a relationship with God, that it doesn't have to be through sacrificing. So the rabbis started to create this alternative way of living.
I mean, but you're hypothesizing. We really know very little about that period.
Well, but we know that the Sadducees disappeared anyway, right? The Sadducees disappeared. And the Pharisees, the rabbis, they became mainstream. They were a minority at the beginning. But they did something right to convince the masses to follow them and not the Sadducees. And by the way, going back to this guy, to Shimon HaTzadik, according to the tradition, he was the last priest that knew how to pronounce the name of God. After he died, nobody else knew how to pronounce the real name of God on Yom Kippur. That was the only time that they would say the name of God out loud on Yom Kippur. History said that he was the last one to know it. And that's why we revere his name so much. Because remember, knowing the name of God makes you a special person. We call it, it makes you a Baal Shem Tov, the one who knows the name of God. Simon. Simon the just, or the righteous. Simon the righteous. That's the translation of the name. Shimon HaTzadik. Okay? David, you have the thing, so keep reading. You will love the next. You will like that.
The men of the great assembly said many things and a wide variety of subjects, of Torah knowledge and life generally. Nevertheless, the Mishnah sums up their legacy to Israel in the 3 lessons stated here.
It's not that they say just 3 things. According to this Rabbi Beryl Wayne, he will say that those 3 things summarize all what they taught. see how, please.
In Avot, the words they said or he used to say appear constantly.
Avot is Pirkei Avot, what we are studying.
Oh, I see. We should have been some quotations there. The words they said, or close quotations, or open quotations.
No, no,
He
no.
used to say.
It doesn't, no quotation. In
Close
Avot,
quotation.
in Pirkei Avot, the words they said, why?
No, it's the words they said, because that always comes up. They said, or they used to say, or they appear constantly. They always signify that the lesson or instruction recorded was central to the life of the person or persons being quoted. Thus, the lessons of Avot are essentially the distillations of the life and teachings of the great personages who appear on its pages. It is far easier to speak for 40 minutes on a subject than to compact the same message into a 10-minute talk. But the 10-minute talk is more effective and will be better and longer remembered. Part of the genius of Avot is its ability to reduce sophisticated, philosophical, complex issues and solutions into concise, easily remembered nuggets of wisdom. Rabbi Beryl Wien.
And that's why Pirkei Avot is so famous, right? Because sometimes just with one verse you can understand what. Sometimes you need to read 20 pages of the Talmud to get the same thing. Yeah. So let's read. You shut it. Let's read the next text, and you will understand perfectly what I'm talking about. Next text.
Rabbi Beryl Vine. I heard about this rabbi who delivered a 40-minute sermon.
Not in Shari Zedek.
After the services, a man approached the rabbi and said, I produce a popular magazine-type radio program. I heard your sermon, and I wonder if you could possibly reduce your sermon to a 3-minute message. Thrilled at the opportunity to reach millions with his words of wisdom, the rabbi eagerly replied, Yes, of course, I could get my message across in 3 minutes. To which the radio producer retorted, Then why didn't you? They are referring separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
You understand the point of the story? Why didn't you? So, Pirkei Avot is this 3 minutes.
And so, kids, I don't think they learn this in school anymore, but when we went to school, I'm not sure what grades it were, probably grade 7 and 8, part of our English class was making précis. I don't know what you call that in Spanish, but précis are you take something like this sheet and you eliminate all the unimportant words, and you take something that's like 500 words and you make it into 300 or 200 words, and that's basically what he's talking about.
Is that something like an executive summary?
Okay?
It's
You have to do that. That's great. Okay?
Précis is just a short essay. A précis is just a short essay.
How do you call it?
It's a short essay, like when you make something concise.
Okay. So you want to read the next text?
Yeah.
Text 5.
They are referring separately to A, Joshua, B, the elders, C, the prophets, with one of the following statements attributed to each group. Midrash Shmuel by Rabbi Samuel ben Isaac de Asida, Safed, first quarter of the 16th century.
Okay. So basically, what this rabbi is saying here is that actually those 3 statements represent to the other 3 groups that we read up above. Just want to put it there because it was interesting that what they are saying is even the elders of the Sheikh Knesset Agdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, they were not talking out of wisdom. It's not that one day out of their great wisdom they figured out those 3 things. Okay? The 3 things, no. Be measured in your judgment, make lots of students and build a fence around the Torah. That's what the Mishnah says. It's not that they realize that by using their intellect, they're repeating something that they received from the previous generation. So, in other words, what the rabbis are trying to say here is that even Pirkei Avot was inspired by the words that they were taught at Sinai.
Infused wisdom.
It's God's wisdom, but it's God's wisdom. It's not at the same level of the Torah. It's not that God actually said Pirkei Avot, but it's inspired by the words of the previous generation, that they are also connected to the teachings that Moses received on Sinai. And he taught to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly. So now the men of the Great Assembly are writing down all that wisdom that they received from the previous generation. But this is a very important thing, because it's not just ethicists, right? Like we have in every generation. In secular culture, we have ethicists, people that they have great intellects and they come out with great words of wisdom. Why? Because they came out with that. The men of the Great Assembly are not trying to go that way. They said, this is not because we are so smart that we know this. This is because we were taught this way.
Big difference.
We were taught this way. Okay? Next. Now let's start talking about the statements, right? The three things they said. First thing was, be deliberate in judgment. Text 6.
This admonition is addressed to judges, even if a similar case has come before a judge 2 or 3 times in the past. He should not be hasty to equate the cases. Rather, he should deliberate before issuing a ruling.
Okay? Very important.
Yeah.
Very important. Let's pass the microphone to the back. Please. 7.
One who acts irreverently in deciding the law and is quick to hand down a ruling before thoroughly investigating the issue until it is clear as day is considered a fool, a wicked person and an arrogant one. This is what the sages commanded. Be deliberate in judgment. Rambam, Hilchot Sanhedrin 27.
Remember Rambam, the Maimonides? So it's this is something, even though I picked just this Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, there are many others in Pirkei Avot that they talk pretty much the same thing. Like Hillel will say, I can't remember which other one, don't judge another person until you are in the same situation, and things in the same thing. But it's interesting that this is the opening teaching from Pirkei Avot. There is nothing before that. All we learn before that are the generations, right? But the first teaching is be deliberate in judgment. And of course, so far we are reading how this applies to judges. But pretty soon in our text, we're going to switch and how this applies to each one of us. Because we also have to judge every day. The judges, they have to evaluate evidence. And after that, they have to make a decision. And this is exactly what we have to do every day. Every day. Everything we do takes a decision. Yes,
And who's the greatest judge? But God. We're judged every day.
yes, I won't argue that.
Wasn't looking for an argument.
Oh, that was a comment? Very good. Okay, so let's keep reading. One more text. Eddie, please, text 8.
We should all sit together.
Yeah, I don't know when it's... Eddie, come closer.
Take your paper.
Yeah, okay.
But you can sit this way if you want. So
Okay, doesn't matter.
this is easy to pass from one to
Okay.
the other.
Okay.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, Eddie, text 8.
One who is quick to render a judicial decision, even though he means to speak the truth, is not an inadvertent sinner. Rather, he is considered almost as one who acts intentionally. He should have taken to heart that the hearts of the hasty do not understand wisdom, an axiom which points out that people are prone to err. This is what our sages meant when they said, "Be meticulous in study, for a careless misinterpretation is considered tantamount to willful transgression." Pirkei Avot 4:16. By taking more time for reflection, one may become aware of new aspects and approaches which his initial thoughts did not yield. Regarding this, King Solomon said, Proverbs 26:12, "If you see a person who thinks he is wise, there is more hope for a fool than for him. One who is wise in his own eyes sees no need to learn, consult with others, or reconsider. The fool, on the other hand, may at least be aware of his deficient knowledge. For him there is yet hope." Rabbi Yonah ben Abraham Gerondi, Spain, 1263.
Yeah, here's his post Maimonides. This guy, I think it's brilliant what he said. Okay? But again, you can see here a transition, because this text that Rabbi Yonah said is not just for judges. This could be applied to everybody. This principle could be applied to everybody. The sense that everything has to be properly measured. Oh, but even things you hear every day, you have to judge. Something that you're about to say, you have to judge it. And at least to be aware if you don't know it, if you don't know what to do. You see what he's saying? If you already think that you know every single time what to do, or what is right, what is wrong, so every year being a fool.
But of course, often we have to make a almost split-session decision, for caught in an emergency situation, or there's no time to consult with our colleagues, or,
Yep.
sometimes happens.
Okay, so let's keep reading. Text 9. Oh, yes. Text 9. Metunim.
Metunim should be understood as related to matana, gift.
Okay, so metunim is if you read in Hebrew what we read before, the number 1 is the 3 statements are Hevu metunim badin, okay, which is be deliberate in judgment. Metunim is metinut is moderation.
How do you say gift?
Matana.
It's a different word.
Yeah, but it's the same shoresh, it's the same root. It's the same root, but you know that sometimes root, the 2 words with different root.
It says gift, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but words in Hebrew with the same root could have totally different meanings. Or what it means is somehow they are connected. You have to find the connection between the 2. Metinut, I think, is called in Hebrew moderation. Okay? But it's moderation and gift. They don't seem to be related, right? But they have the same shoresh, the same root. So somehow they have to be connected. And this is what the Rabbi is saying. The passage?
The passage as a directive to appoint judges who despise money and are not liable to accept graft in payment for distorting judgment. Rather, the judges should issue rulings to the people as a gift, never taking or expecting anything in return.
Okay.
Rabbi Yom Tov Asavili, Spain, 1260-1314.
Yeah, Asavili. You know what it means, Asavili? From Seville. From Seville. You already know where he was living, this guy, Spain. Okay, so it's an interpretation that the word used for how do you call it here? Deliberate is related to the word gift. Number 10.
Once,
I want to speak to the various meanings of the word gift, because when we think of gift, as we usually think of something that somebody parts with something, but it could also be something that a person has inherently. In other words, the person who has to make a decision may have the gift of making an honorable or equitable decision. It doesn't mean that they are giving something that we think of as a gift. It's something that I would almost say God-given to a person. They have a gift to accomplish something. That's it.
That's a very good point. And when we say people are gifted, like a musician, a great musician is gifted, you think of it as a God-given skill.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep reading. 10.
The maxim applies to all people, for each of us is a judge who must evaluate people and situations. In all matters, one should act deliberately rather than in haste.
Okay.
It goes back to the expression, haste makes waste.
Well, but you see, here is how they try to explain the rabbis and how this is not just for judges. This is for everybody. And now you can understand why this is perhaps the most important thing that the rabbi have to teach. The way you judge things. Don't do anything in a hurry. Think everything you do. Take your time. Be sure you're doing the right things at every moment. Even when you do a mitzvah, when you avoid doing something wrong, it's a judgment call. Right? Everything is a judgment call. And sometimes when you study Torah, when you study Talmud, what you learn is how to make good decisions. I'm teaching the conversion classes. One of the first things we do at the beginning of every class is to open the class with an ethical dilemma. And then I ask the students, what would you do? And sometimes we struggle. Because some people will say, oh, I never thought about that. So the goal of the exercise is to make them think. First, where do you stand? If you're ever in that situation, what will you do? Now that you're about to become a Jew, how does it make it different? You do something different. So we study about what the rabbis say and teach for that moment. That's a judgment. That's a judgment. Basically, even if you say that the Torah was given to us so we can become good people, how do you become a good people? What do you have to do to be a good people, a good person? But you have to make a decision every time you do something. Everything you do is a decision. Or a judgment. Everything. And sometimes if you do it without thinking, making a mistake. So the rabbis here said, this is for everybody. It's not only for judges. Okay? But let's go to text 11 now.
The prophets equate the practice of monetary justice with knowledge of God. One who judges cases of the poor and destitute, that is good, for that is knowledge of me, the word of Hashem. Jeremiah, hence the Mishnah urges careful deliberation in monetary cases, even more than in questions of ritual law.
Why is that? Why do you think is that?
I think because when it's come monetary decisions, it could be injurious, unintentional injurious to.
Because there is you're affecting somebody else. You, as a person, you can make the decision to follow every single stringency in the Torah. You know, when sometimes for the law, you have different options, right? Sometimes you can go to the more lenient decision or to the more stringent decision. For example, for those who keep kosher, you know, some people follow, you can buy kosher milk in the supermarket, or you can buy Halav Israel milk. You know what Halav Israel is? It's like an ultra kosher milk. Ultra kosher milk. Because there was a Jew supervising every step of the way that milk. Does it make it any better? No. It's just a different kind of supervision. Some people will decide to do that. So some people like to take every single time the more stringent thing. Good for you if you want to do that. You want to apply that principle to your life? Fine. But if you're judging about somebody else's money, you have to think every time, and every case will be different. Don't be someone who rushed to say, yeah, always the most stringent way. Because you are playing with somebody else's life. Or your life, do whatever you want. Somebody else's life, take your time, think about it. That's what they say. When you are talking about something that is affecting somebody else, you have to be very careful of what you do. And then the rabbis applied also the principle of Kal Vachomer, said if this applies for monetary issues, even more so when the life of somebody is at stake in a trial. But I guess the rabbis talk about that about money because there is already a prohibition of the Torah when it's a case of capital punishment, all the precautions you have to take. But for monetary issues, there is no real explicit warning on the Torah, so the rabbis try to say that it's very important to pay attention to that anyway. Yeah. Let's go to text 4, page 4, sorry. Let's read this one. You will love this one. Text 12. It's a funny story.
There was an elderly East European rabbi suffering an ailment. After weeks of trying, he was finally able to obtain an appointment with a great specialist, a reputed expert in the field. The rabbi was ushered into one of many small cubicles in the doctor's office, where he sat and waited for the doctor to enter and examine him. The doctor eventually rushed into the cubicle, quickly heard out the symptoms, made a perfunctory examination of the patient, and jotted down a prescription. As the doctor hurriedly got up to go to the next cubicle, the rabbi frowned noticeably. The doctor asked what was wrong, to which the rabbi answered, "I have been a rabbi for over 50 years. Every Friday morning, women bring me bruised chickens and ask me to decide whether the chickens are kosher. I am well versed in this field, and I have decided such questions hundreds of times in my career. But each time I discuss the matter with each woman and review the matter in the codes of law. Even though I am convinced I know the correct answer beforehand, now if a dead chicken is worthy of such deliberation, isn't a still breathing, albeit old rabbi?" Good question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about, you can understand how this principle is not just for judges.
There's a book written by a doctor, and it's called How Doctors Think. And it's very interesting because that isn't the person who, it's not the same person, but it's the same topic. And it was actually a criticism of how the doctors practice, not like the shachat, would practice, but giving deliberation to the person. And this particular doctor, and if it's a good read, and it's really meant for doctors and lay people. I asked my doctor to read the book, but I don't think he liked the idea, because what it, but what it does say is that how doctors think, and Dr. Goldenberg can tell me if I'm wrong, but depending on what you saw before, will decide what you're going to think on a decision now. So if you see the person before you had a cough and it wasn't serious, another person comes in with a cough, you'll also think it's not serious. So, and the point is, and especially when it comes to older people, and I think of the one that he mentioned in there, because there isn't enough time to spend in an exam, and just the same thing here with the rabbi, there isn't enough time for the doctor to give him the deliberation he thought whatever is bothering him was due. And in that, it's interesting because in not giving the deliberation, they risk injuring somebody not unknowingly, and I guess.
Yeah, but I heard a case. It was a person that I met in Chile. He had a car accident. Very, very bad car accident. He was in the hospital for a long time, okay? Broken bones. And so one day the doctor comes to the room. Didn't even say good morning or anything. Just picked up the chart, that is hanging with all the blood work and things. So here is the blood work. He looks at the x-rays and said, "You're good to go." And the guy looks at the doctor and said, "How is the patient doing?" Right? All what he wanted with the numbers, the doctor. The numbers look great, but the patient was feeling like, it's synagogue, I can't say the word.
Yeah.
And he actually he wasn't well. The fact that the blood is okay and the x-rays look good, it doesn't mean that the person is ready to go.
So I think it's interesting, this thing about the East European rabbis. So it's obviously talking about something close to 100 years ago. That's the first thing, and it's the same complaint today. The other thing is,
It doesn't look that old, because the doctor was seeing it in one cubicle next to the other. That's a very modern.
you think, but
No,
it certainly
before the
sounds.
doctors used
I
to
was
have
going to say,
that.
and the other thing, just like there are good doctors and bad doctors, there's good rabbis and bad rabbis.
Yeah.
And so I would think, if we're going to be deliberate in judgment, what we ought not to do is paint all doctors with the same brush,
Of course.
or all rabbis with the same brush.
Of course. Same way that I'm a rabbi and I have no clue about chickens. Right? Yeah,
That's
very
true, and that's
funny
actually
story.
the point that the doctor was making, because all patients are not the same either.
Yeah, it's like the joke of the doctor who was in a hurry and he enters the hospital and he said to the nurse, "Take the temperature of all the patients and give me the average."
Well, I'll tell you something.
I waited for like 3 months, this is a long time ago, for an appointment with a specialist. And I knew the history of this man. He's a very good doctor, very good person in the community, and did mission work, et cetera, et cetera. But the day that I went, sort of like your story, the number, and I usually make notes so I know there's 3 minutes. So I reiterated what my points were. He looked at me, and he had one foot on out the door and one hand on the knob of the door to exit. And before I even shut the door to get dressed, he was, relating to the computer, which I know they're busy. But when I was dressed and I went out into the hall and he happened to be standing there, I said, Dr. So-and-so, I've known you for a long time, and I respect you. I says, I don't think you realize what's happening to you, and I'd like to tell you. Because I said, the impact you have on patients is important. And I said, it doesn't sound like you. I says, I think you need a holiday, and I'll tell you how that made me feel. And I said, I know that's not your true character, so I'm taking the time to tell you this. Well, I got a phone call later, and he appreciated it.
Oh, good. Why don't you read the next one?
There you go. You just.
Text 13. Now we are moving to the second statement. Raise up many disciples.
Raise up many disciples. The Academy of Shammai said, a Torah teacher should teach only one who is wise and humble, and who comes from a good family. The Academy of Hillel said, teach all, for there have been many sinners among the Jews who were brought near to Torah study and emerged as righteous, pious, and upstanding persons.
Okay?
Even
Okay. Before we move on there, why do you think the men of the Great Academy, the Great Assembly, combined these two statements, one after the other? Judge everybody, not in a hurry, and then immediately after said, raise up many disciples. Why one after the other? How are they connected? And I believe that the thing is, the statement that they were trying to make is also the difference between Shammai and Hillel. When Hillel is saying, if a Torah teacher should teach only one who is wise and humble and who comes from a good family, that's a judgment. But if I say to you, make many disciples, I mean teach to everybody, what I'm saying is no judgment. This is mind-blowing how inclusive that statement is when they are said, raise up many disciples. Just go and do it without judging. Because at the end of the day, you never know what person is going to do after. How many people do you know that when they were young, they were so good and talented? What did they do with that? Went down the drain. And there are many other people that you know them high school, and they were troublemakers. And then what do you know? Now they're famous doctors or architects, or they have this great business. And they say, I never saw that coming. Because we usually don't have all the facts when we judge people. Don't get me wrong. The Torah doesn't say that you should never judge anybody. What it's saying is that you should have all the facts before you judge somebody. The problem is, and why we get so many trouble in this generation, it's because we judge people without knowing anything about the other person.
You wouldn't survive in their life sometime per day.
Oh, microphone.
No, I've done work in shelters when I was younger, and I'd often come home and tell my family, people look down on these people. Some people may look down, I should say. I said, if you listen to the story, you wouldn't survive a day in their lives, the courage it takes to live one day in their life. And I was always humbled by that.
But you will see that there are many times that there are teachers that they always have their favorites, and they put all the emphasis on those people. And there are teachers that actually they are great, that they teach everybody. And they try to get the best from everybody, not just for a few. Here Shammai said, no, quality is more important than quantity. And Hillel was saying quantity is more important than quality. Yep. Because
What I was going to say, I considered those people my teachers. Everybody's your teacher, really.
Yeah, but because Shammai was said, get fewer students, but spend more time with each one of them. Hillel said, no, take as many students as you want, as you can, and encourage them. And then eventually they're going to study more. You have to start with many. But that's what Hillel is saying is actually with these scholars of our Mishnah are saying, which is very interesting that Shammai somehow is challenging that statement.
Right. And Chabad.
Why? How do they teach everybody?
They teach everybody. No, I'm saying Chabad follows the Academy of Hillel.
Yeah.
They do exactly
They
that.
teach everybody.
They teach
Sorry.
everybody, and that's why they've been so successful.
That was one of the fights between Hasidim and Mitnagdim. It was time in history when they went back to teaching only a select group of people.
The other thing I was going to say is that, so this is the corollary, or at least the corollary to this is the story of the Gentile that comes to Shammai and Hillel and says to teach him everything while he's standing on his one foot.
Yeah.
It's the same. It
same
comes
thing.
from the same thing.
Same thing. And at the end of the day, what happened is because of Hillel had a more gently approach, he supposedly ended up learning all the details anyway. It's, yeah. Okay, keep reading. David, you want to keep reading? Text 14.
Sure. Even if one developed disciples while young, he should develop many disciples, continuing to teach even into old age.
Why is that? Because we offer different things at every stage of our life. It's interesting, when Soloveitchik reads this statement, he's understanding what the rabbis are saying. Was it make many disciples meant never stop teaching. Never stop teaching. But it's also about judgment of yourself in this case. It's not about judging others, but judging yourself. When you said, used to be young, used to have so much energy, and now I have nothing else to offer. That's a call of judgment. You're judging yourself negatively. You have nothing else to offer. We always have something to offer. It might be different, but we always have something to offer in every stage of our life. Next.
I'll do another one then. 15. Students are catalysts to bring out their teacher's potential. Said.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever. Why are the words of Torah compared to a tree? She is a tree of life who grasp her.
Right? We all know that. Etz chaimi lamachazikim ba. Etz chaimi lamachazikim ba. She's a tree of life to those who grasp her. So basically the rabbis are asking here, why are the words of Torah compared to a tree?
Just as small chips of wood are used to ignite larger pieces, so it is with Torah scholars. The younger ones sharpen the minds of the older ones with their constant questioning.
But it's so true. So true. Sometimes when the kids ask you, I can tell you, sometimes you don't see that coming. Oh, I never thought about that. It's happening. Okay, let's move on. Who wants to read now?
Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzhak,
Oh, that was the name of the previous one.
Babylonia, died in 356. Rabbi Haina said, I have learned much from my teachers and from my colleagues more than from my teachers, but from my students more than from them all.
Same reason, and this is coming from the Talmud. Okay.
T.B. Tanit. I don't know
Yeah,
what
that
that
means
is.
Talmud from Babylonia, Masechet or Tractate Ta'anit, page 7b. That's what
This is an exhortation to judges. A judge should involve his students in the discussion because the involvement of more people will yield a clarity unattainable even by the most brilliant individual.
So it's interesting because even judges should sometimes be able to ask for advice for other people when they're having difficult cases, not try to figure out everything by themselves.
Even secular judges, especially in the Supreme Court, have law clerks, that discuss the cases with them, even if they're, so, it's important. And I think there's something, I could be wrong, when the Sanhedrin existed, and if the rules in the Tractate Sanhedrin were ever followed, apparently in a capital case, even a student was called upon to state something in defense, and is that not correct?
I don't know. Seems to be an expert on the Sanhedrin.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert. I read the tractate in the English translation, but I admit, even though I'm legally trained, 90% of it I didn't understand because I'm still not familiar with Talmudic reasoning.
It's complex.
Yeah.
It's very complex. But let's keep reading.
What number are we on? This is a charge to teachers that they should enable students to stand on their own feet. A teacher's goal must be to enable students to be able to learn independently by providing them with a clear and true understanding of Torah. Rabbi Gershon Scholl Yom Tov Lipman Ben Natan Halevi Heller.
It's a long name. Probably have problems on the tombstone, right? All that wouldn't fit. 19, please. Keep reading, keep reading.
What does
Yom Tov is good. It's like a holiday, but that's the name. Yom means day, Tov means good, good day. But the translation of Yom Tov is holiday, or festival. Right? Passover has 2 days of Yom Tov at the beginning and 2 days of Yom Tov at the end.
He said Yom Tov.
Yom Tov?
He said Yom Tov.
Yom Tov? Yom Tov is Yom
So
Tov.
why do we say Yom Tov? I know that. I know the word is Yom Tov, but
Yom Tov, it's just pronunciation.
that's it. We just say it wrong. Is that what
No, Yom Tov.
Yeah, but if I wish to say Yom Tov, you'd look at me like I'm saying something.
Well,
Yom Tov, you're right. It's just I had a sloppy pronunciation.
Not you, but everybody says Yom Tov. I bet if you got a card would say Happy Yom Tov.
With an N?
With an N.
No, it's got an M. For me, it's just sloppy pronunciation, but it's Yom Tov. Yom. It's like you have to stretch more the neck to the Yom. Yon. Yon, you don't have to do this at the end.
even when Yiddish adopts a Hebrew term, often the pronunciation is
It's in Yiddish,
different,
yeah. But it's Yom Tov. Yom. Okay, let's keep reading.
This passage as a directive to parents not to be satisfied with one Torah scholar in the family while the other children are involved in more worldly pursuits. Instead, parents should develop many students.
That's interesting. That's a totally different approach of the same teaching. Rise up many disciples. That even your own children, all of them should study Torah. Not one, but all of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Now, next statement. This is the last statement, number 3. This is the most complex of the 3. Because this is something that sometimes we have problems to deal with. The fence around the Torah. What is a fence around the Torah? Is to make laws of the Torah more stringent than they really are, to avoid violating the original law. For example, if the Torah said you should not boil the kid in its mother's milk, the rabbi said you cannot mix any kind of meat with milk. Even more so, after eating meat, you have to wait, depends where you're coming from, up to 6 hours before you can have any dairy. That's a fence. It's a fence around the law. It's kind of, sometimes you want to strangle the rabbi. It says, the Torah says you should not boil the kid in its mother's milk. How did we go from there to wait 6 hours between chicken and dairy? How? It's a fence over a fence over a fence. Yes.
So,
Why is chicken not also dairy? Do we get eggs from the chicken?
I know, but the rabbis decided because it's a fence. It's a fence. It's just in case. So you will never make a mistake. So they said chicken is involved. Chicken is a meat. So we put it in the same category. I know. Yes, I agree. And the rabbis know it's a bird, but they say it's meat. So it falls within the same category. It's a fence around the law. Yeah, it's. We can't understand what the rabbis were thinking at the time that they said that. They were just trying to protect the original law. It's for example, Shabbat. We light the candles of Shabbat sometimes 20 minutes before Shabbat starts. Why 20 minutes? Why don't you light the candles right before Shabbat? And the rabbi said you have to light them at least 20 minutes before the fence. Because if for some reason your clock, your watch, is not perfectly synchronized, it's going, it's 10 minutes off, you're still not violating Shabbat. So we put fences around the certain law to make it more stringent. So if you break the same fence, you're still not violating the original law. Yes, Eddie?
The trouble with some of these fences or stringencies, rather than protecting the Torah, they keep people from it. I mean, nowadays especially, if they figure the laws are so strict. Some of them, like...
I truly believe that the 21st century should be at times of leniency in general. But you'll see. There is a case that I put here for you when you're going to see how a Torah fence could be counterproductive. But let's go there. Let's reach. Text 20.
But the intention is good.
You will see. Text 20.
Preventive legislation is sometimes needed in order to keep one from violating Torah prohibitions. This concept is familiar in many areas of activity. For example, a government will act a margin of safety in regulating the weight limits carried by airliners with the dosage of potentially harmful drugs. Thus, the sages prohibited certain marriages to prevent possible incest and forbade certain activities on the Sabbath, such as muktzah, the handling of certain utensils, lest one use them to perform a labor prescribed by the Torah. The enactment of some such cautionary rules is scripturally mandated. You shall safeguard my charge, Leviticus 18:30, which the sages interpret as make a safeguard for my charge. Talmud Babylon Yevamot 21a, Rabbi Nosson Sherman.
Okay? So, very important. Text 21. Okay, let's take over. 21.
Even though the main prohibition for a Nazirite is the drinking of wine, the Torah forbids him to partake of anything similar to wine. The Torah uses this as an example to teach the sages how to fulfill their mandate to safeguard the Torah's laws. Using the prohibition of a Nazirite as a prototype, the sages forbade various acts in order to prevent one from transgressing the Torah's prohibitions. The Torah provides this model in order to show that it is the will of God that the sages erect fences around the Torah.
And read the 22nd, because the 22, this is a story.
A young man with an insatiable appetite for non-kosher food was warned by his father never to enter the local non-kosher eatery. If you go into that restaurant, I will punish you severely, said the father. His mother, full of maternal love and compassion, wanted at all costs to save her beloved son from his father's wrath. Aware of the boy's weakness, she assumed a strict posture and forbade the son from coming within 2 blocks of the restaurant. Her surface severity was in truth an expression of love for her son. Similarly, the enactments of the rabbis are not reflective of a cold, mechanistic projection of the system as much as an outpouring of care and compassion for the Jewish people. The rabbinic code is an effort to save people from hurting themselves spiritually by violating God's Torah.
Okay? So that was what the rabbi had in mind when they said you should not mix bird with milk. So to avoid that maybe in a rush, in a confusion, you will have red meat instead. A mistake. They said, no meat whatsoever mixed with dairy to avoid any possibility that you will eventually violate the law of the Torah. Do you agree? No, I don't, but that's what exactly what they were thinking when they said what they said. Like,
The eggs and the chicken with dairy.
yeah, the eggs are parv.
So is fish.
Yeah, the fish are parv. That's another thing. But eggs, I don't know what they think they were parv, because if you ask a vegan, they won't eat eggs. They don't think it's parv. So, text 23. Mel, if you want to read that, we have just a couple more text on the last page. So.
The instruction to erect barriers around mitzvah observance as a personal obligation.
Sorry, is a personal. Every person.
Every person recognizes his own weaknesses, should assume stringencies beyond the letter of the law in order to protect himself against sin.
Okay?
That's Rabbi
So,
Israel.
this is the thing, we should try sometimes to do it ourselves. If you find that you are weak in certain areas of your Torah observance, you create a fence around that to avoid violating the Torah. Where you see, it's all about, start with the first thing that we read at the beginning, judgment.
And sometimes that works, and other times if you concentrate on that, it's the opposite.
Yeah, but you will see
Again, discernment.
you will see text 24. This is a case where a fence around the Torah didn't really work. And it's in the Torah. 24.
The sages exercised great wisdom and balance in instituting such ordinances, and they cautioned against adding to what they imposed. The Midrash teaches that erecting fences capriciously can be counterproductive. Adam's wife Eve, in the Garden of Eden, embellished upon God's commandment not to eat the tree of knowledge, and told the serpent that she was not allowed even to touch the tree. The serpent thereupon pushed her against it, and presto, nothing happened. The serpent thus proved to her that eating the tree's fruit would also bring forth no untoward results. The rest is history.
Right? It's a perfect case, because if you see, Eve said, God said I shouldn't touch the tree. God never said that. God said you should not eat it. Although there are some interpretations that actually Adam told her. Don't even touch it. But then when they create a fence, and then you forget that it's a fence. That's what is the problem. Or what you forget of why the fence was put in the first place. Protect what? Why? These days there are many things that we do as Jewish observants that we don't realize that all what it was a fence to protect something else. Let me give you an example of a fence, and we don't even realize that it's a fence. Kosher wine. Kosher wine, what we call kosher wine, started as a fence. The Torah doesn't say anything about kosher wines. But the rabbis realized that wine was something that it was used to socialize. So they were afraid that there were two Jews drinking together in a bar, and they would say, "Oh, how you doing? Well, what are you doing? I have a son." They say, "Oh, you have an unmarried son. I have an unmarried daughter. What do we make a shidduch?" Right? So Rabbi didn't want Jews and non-Jews mingling together in a social place to avoid intermarriage, for example. And that's what. So they decided the Jews can drink only kosher wine. Of course, whiskey didn't exist in those days. Because that's what the question is. So why kosher wine, but there's nothing about whiskey? That's what you drink in a bar. Because whiskey didn't exist. It was not invented until what, 1700s? When hard liquors were invented? They didn't know how to distill. Well, they had with fermentation, and the wine with the fancy thing. Of course, they had probably beers or other things, but that was things that people would drink at home. Everything that you can ferment, you can drink it in those days. But they couldn't distill alcohol. That's why we have all these laws that they are just about kosher wine and not whiskey.
There are certain things in daily life that are offenses that aren't religious. We stop at a stop sign at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, and it's sort of for similar reasons.
So you get used to it. Same thing that when you use the signal to change lanes, even though there are no cars around you. So you get used to it. Okay, so that's great. Thank you all for coming. Just please sign here that you came. Sign here if you're there, put it, otherwise add your name. Welcome. Thank you everybody on the internet. We are going to finish the class for tonight. Hope to see you all in 2 weeks. And Chag Sameach. Happy Hanukkah.
When is the next class? Is there one here?
Let me double check. The 19th, we are okay. Yes.
Are we continuing into the new year also?
Yeah. No, there is nothing on the 2nd. It jumps to the 9th. The New Year starts on the 9th.
19th of December to the 9th.
Just because January 2nd is, we are all buying stuff.
Recovering from hangovers.
Huh?
Or recovering from hangovers.
I don't know what that is. Next one is in 2 weeks, and then after that is in January 9th. But